Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The property market is pretty remarkable right now. Prices have been recovering in cities right around the country. Well, maybe not Canberra, but most cities, despite 12 interest rate hikes in just 15 months. It is, of course, a question of supply and demand. I wanted to look today at what this means for investors in the residential market, with a focus today on apartments, where we might see the greatest demand and what's happening in the supply pipeline. We've spoken in the past to real estate services company CBRE, a supporter of this podcast. Justin Brown is the chairman of CBRE Residential Projects. Justin, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Now, many of us would know CBRE more on the commercial side. So just as a 101, how is CBRE involved in residential projects?
Okay, yep. CBRE is predominantly a commercial business on a global scale, but has strong businesses, particularly through the Asia Pacific and moving up to the UK with residential development, and in particular developments that are on the premium end, at which we provide research and information and expertise for off-the-plan sales. And in Australia, CBRE Residential is the largest in that field.
Okay, great. So let's start with demand. We hear lots about property markets all the time. We don't really delve into it too much, and that's what I want to do today, Justin. Let's start with demand. Is it mostly about immigration, or is there more to it?
Look, immigration's a big factor. It's been widely discussed, but there is an extra million people, and that doesn't include students that are migrating to Australia over the next 3 years. Now, if you look at that, our research shows that for every 3 migrants, you need a property. And if we look at where we are at the moment, we believe that we need somewhere in the order of 570,000 new properties between now and 2026. And we are currently producing 55,000.
Right. So we're at about, so 150 out of 500. So we're kind of at 30% or thereabouts of what we need.
That also doesn't take into account the local market. That doesn't take into account the 590,000 students that we have, international students that we have. What a lot of people don't understand is we have the largest percentage of students that go to our universities in the world. So 25% of our students, which is 590,000 at the moment, are international and has to be housed somewhere.
So what's the answer? I mean, this is only an 11-minute discussion, Justin, so I'm not sure we're going to get all the answers, but what is it about? I mean, it's all about creating supply, but we're just not doing it.
No, we're not. We've never been great at creating supply. We've sort of in the last 30 years, we've probably had 2 or 3 periods where you'd say that we had an oversupply. But the last 5 years, it's been very difficult, and it was led. The investors stopped really purchasing new apartments or new properties in around 2017. We then moved into that COVID period where really there wasn't any supply developed through that period. We then moved into supply chain. We then had the massive increase in construction costs. And that's sort of coupled by a planning system that in most parts of the country is fairly diabolical. So we currently have this situation where, if you'd like, an equilibrium in the rental market should be about 3%. So that's sort of a fair market for tenants and owners of property, if you'd like. And we currently sit at about 1.5%. And, we've got places in the country like Perth and Adelaide that are 0.6%.
So 3% referring to 3% of what?
A vacancy factor.
Yep, okay.
So it sort of means that if you've got 3%, there's generally a fair market, what we would call it. But if you look down in terms of supply, Sydney will develop, or New South Wales will develop 34,000 dwellings. We'll have a shortfall this year of 18,000 dwellings. Melbourne will have a shortfall of just under 24,000 dwellings. Brisbane, 12,000, Perth, 10,500, Adelaide, 4,000. That's in a year. And so if you look at where our vacancy factor is, if we're saying it's sort of just shy of 1.5%, it's going to drop 0.2 to 0.5% each year as we go forward, which would really tighten that market up.
So what's the answer? Is it more support from government? Is it less bureaucracy, less red tape, better planning? Is it kind of some incentives for builders who are on fixed price contracts or kind of who are struggling because they were on fixed price contracts to get ahead? What is the answer?
Well, so, therein lies part of the problem. What the builders have been through over the last 3 years, where they're on fixed price contracts and the market realistically moved 30%. So they were just losing money. And we've seen how many sort of administrations and liquidations have happened to the builders. So that is slowly starting to change. And the costs, they are still going up, but they're a bit more regulated and the supply chain is a lot better. But one of our biggest issues is really how do we produce product readily? And yes, we have bureaucracy in this country in most of its planning systems and the layers. And really, it's sort of, yes, we need property, but not in my backyard.
Yeah.
Needs to change. And really part of that, I think, to change it dramatically and quickly is really we need a proper system with affordable housing and social housing, which the governments are trying to address. There's a new SEP coming through in New South Wales that the Minns government is bringing in, where that if you, in a new development, if you provide 15% social housing in that, they'll give you an uplift of 30% in terms of the saleable area. But again, that looks like it's getting slightly watered down as well as it's coming into the system, and the draft will come out shortly. Queensland and Victoria are trying and look at trying to push that through, and there's some funding through there. The other thing that we really need to do is look at it's called the build-to-rent model. And that's building dwellings, if you like, apartment blocks that are for long-term rentals. And if we look at Australia, 0.2% of our market, so 0.2% is in that long-term build-to-rent space. In the UK, it's 5.4%, and in the US, it's 12%. Now, part of the issue that we've had and why it hasn't taken off here is that our taxation system and the foreign investment taxation system has been too high. And also, there hasn't been enough clarity on it. Now, the Albanese government has come through and said they were going to halve that. But then with recent times, we've had the issue where the Victorian and Queensland governments are now talking and putting rental caps. And so your international investors, which globally have been a big supporter of the build-to-rent scenarios, they're concerned about where the clarity is. So as a start, we need to get clarity in our system. And then we also need to streamline the planning system for development. Because at the moment, 5 years ago, Sean, you used to be able to purchase a property, obtain a development approval if it was reasonable, obtain a builder, finance and pre-sales, and between 12 and 14 months to start construction. Now with the system that you're going through, particularly over the last 18 months, it's taking 2.5 to 3 years.
Oh, wow.
From when you purchase a site to when you start construction. So then you add on the 2 years, if it's like a general term, in terms of how long it takes to construct an apartment building, it's 5 years from the first inception.
Stay with me, Justin. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Justin Brown, Chair of CBRE Residential Projects. I'm just changing tack slightly. Where do people want to live? So we do talk a lot about apartments and the need to boost supply. Has there been any change in where people want to live? So the backyard with a clothesline and picket fence and things like that, which I suppose I grew up with. Do people talk about that anymore? Is it all about higher density living as we go forward? Where do we stand on all that?
Look, it is. In the last 10 years, we really have moved into a higher density scenario. And also, a lot of the immigrants that come into the country aren't used to having that big quarter-acre block as well. We're also starting to really see the ageing population and the empty nesters that are now selling out of their larger homes, but they want to basically be in suburbs like where they grew up, that have a village feel, that have infrastructure and the like. So people generally are looking to be around social infrastructure and transport.
And I mean, some of the state premiers, particularly in recent weeks, have actually been talking about that, the idea that infrastructure projects are actually about housing policy, so it's all connected.
Yes, and it is. If you look globally, I mean, that's how it occurs. But it makes a lot of sense. If you've got infrastructure and you've got transport nodes around you, there's less need for cars and vehicles. You can get there, particularly with the metro system that the government is putting throughout New South Wales. And then around that, you get the density, which then you can get the social infrastructure and the restaurants and cafes and the like that comes with it.
So, Justin Brown, Chair of CBRE Residential Projects, where do we end up in this? Where are we in 5 years' time?
I think 5 years' time, we will probably be starting to see a way forward. But my concern is that we have a real pinch point that's coming. And I don't see the way that the government is working and how quickly our population is growing and how long it takes for things to do, that we're going to see a proper way forward in the next 3 to 4 years.
That's scary. I mean, particularly given the cost of living pressures, interest rate pressures, that's really scary.
It is. It's quite concerning. And look, it's been on the agenda for a long time, and it's sort of one of those topics that people like to turn the other way to because it's not popular, but it is something that needs to be addressed.
Justin, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
My pleasure.
That was Justin Brown, Chairman of CBRE Residential Projects, a supporter of this podcast. This is the Fear and Greed business interview. Remember, you should get professional advice before making any investment decisions. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.